Good day, I'm Dr. T and welcome to my office. So in a previous video, I talked about assessment as part of the setup for your class, thinking about your learning objectives, then your assessment, then moving on to how you're going to teach the course. So as a continuation to that video, I wanted to spend a moment and just talk about the approaches that I personally use for assessment for my courses. And some kind of general background, I'm teaching mostly introductory courses, quite often first, second year courses, and then I am a chemistry instructor, so it's either chemistry or physical sciences that I'm teaching. I also typically have around 100 students. Sometimes they can creep closer to 150, sometimes a bit less than 100. Varies from semester to semester, depends on how enrollment does. So with that number of students, I am going to have to take a few measures to assist myself with grading because I can overwhelm myself if I'm not careful. Okay, so generally when I'm thinking of assessment, I'm actually thinking of kind of three bins. And you can kind of see this in the syllabus by the weightings of the three bins. So the first bin, which typically doesn't get a lot of weighting in the syllabus for reasons that'll become fairly obvious, are going to be activities that they're really learning activities. They're not really assessments. But if I don't put a grade on them, the students won't do them. Let's be honest, when I took Calc 2, my first year of college, I was supposed to do the homework and then take the test. Well, I showed up to class, I listened, I took notes, and I took the test. I didn't do the homework, and I got a C in that class, and I suspect that's why. And of course, that class, the homework wasn't graded, so I didn't do it. If you want the students to do the homework, you're probably going to have to put a grade on it. Let's just be honest, people are people. Okay, so in that case, I'm going to put a grade on it. It's not meant to be particularly hard. Most students are going to do fairly well. When it comes to grading the homework, I'm going to use an online homework system whenever possible. This is going to have kind of a two-edged reason to do this, or kind of two major approaches. One, this is going to take a fairly large grading burden away from me and automate that. The second one is it does give students immediate feedback, and since this is primarily a learning activity, not an overarching assessment, the immediate feedback really facilitates that learning. So this way the students can do it, they get it wrong, they realize it's wrong, they can redo it, and hopefully learn from the mistakes in real time. So the online homework systems, I do value when there are good ones. Now, I have some classes that I teach. I love the online homework selections. I shouldn't say I love them. They're varying between bad to halfway decent. So there's some halfway decent options out there. There are other classes that I don't use online homework for because there isn't a good option out there. I have not found a provider that has a good set of questions and a good format. There are some of them that's like, I don't care how good the questions are, I can't use it. I can't expect my students to. It's just that poorly done with its UX. For those other classes, I may either skip that kind of category or I might change it into something else where I do hand grade. Additionally, some labs are going to get put into this category. Labs which are much more of a learning experience for the students. I want them to try, I want them to experience what's going on, but there's really no good assessment built into that lab. And in that case, then the lab is graded by, yep, you did it, you gave it the old college try, good work. And that's fairly straightforward. For this reason, a lot of my lab classes, if it's a mixed lecture lab course, the lab course will probably have a kind of a diminished role. It won't be the traditional 25%. It will be a bit less because a lot of the labs will just be, yep, you did it, good work. Once again, it depends on the class. Majors versus non-majors. Majors, I'm going to be a lot more, hey, how close did you get it? Because you need to be able to work at the bench. If they're, say, nursing majors, they're probably not going to enter a lab again. They're going to have practicals of their own, but it won't be my class. Okay, so that's kind of the first bin, where it's a grade because I want the students to do it, not because it's an assessment. And so that's usually going to be fairly diminished. And that extra points that they're going to be getting, because everyone should be getting A's in this category, are going to be used to offset the next category, which are going to be true assessments. These are the core assessments for the class. Typically, this is going to be exams. Maybe some quizzes thrown in the mix. A couple of alternative assessments might be in there. But these are kind of your core assessments, and quite often these are going to be focusing rather low on Bloom's taxonomy. Not necessarily the bottom, but especially for entry-level courses, the course focus is going to be fairly low on Bloom's taxonomy. A lot of knowledge, understanding, application, not a lot of synthesis and evaluation. Maybe a little bit of analysis here and there, but not a ton. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to have my exams. What I have found that works really well for me at my current institution, keeping in mind that, once again, I do have a reasonably large number of students, is I take my exams, I divide them roughly in half. Some classes it's 1/3, 2/3, other classes it's 2/3, 1/3. Just depends on what that particular section, what I'm currently teaching in that class, what are the learning objectives. But I divide them roughly in half, and the first half is going to be bottom of Bloom's taxonomy. Typically knowledge, maybe some understanding going on there. And these are going to be kind of a mix of questions, quite often ones that I can use my audience response system to automate, which is going to help me in grading, because once again, if you have 50 to 100 exams coming in at once, it's going to take a while to grade these. You're going to want some help. And so with these guys, quite often I'll have a fairly nice chunk of fill in the word, and then I'll give the students a word bank. The word bank has two values to it, or two reasons it's there. One, it lowers the stress for the students. They're able to see, the possible choices. Now there's 50 to 100 words in this word bank, so it's not exactly like giving them the answer. They still have to know pretty much what it is, but if they get the general idea and they're just like, can't get the word off the tip of their tongue, that will help them. And then it's also part of the automation feature with the audience response system. If I associate each word with a number, then they enter in the number associated to the word, and it makes the grading very easy. And then, throw in some multiple choice questions. Multiple choice questions are kind of the easiest to grade, hardest to create. A good multiple choice question is really, really hard. For these guys, what you're looking at doing is looking at one learning objective. You want to figure out, an answer to a question, as well as a few distractors that make the student really think about what's going on there and not simply look at the patterns of the question. There are multiple choice questions that literally I don't need to read the question. I can figure out the answer, or at least narrow it down to 2. You don't want to be doing that. Now, things that can help you with this are simply, if possible, not doing A through D, but doing A through J. Simply increasing the number of possible choices gives you much more variety. A good old-fashioned all of the above, some of the above, none of the above is a great way of really making things much more interesting. The students usually will talk about it when you have A through J, and those are the last 3 choices. But it definitely makes sure that they know what's going on with those. But with multiple choice questions, they're fairly hard to write, because they do take a lot of thought of how is a student going to answer this wrong. You have to predict the misconceptions. And once you do that, though, if you can get a good one, then that is very easy to grade, potentially Scantron, depending on the format. I will be honest right off the bat, the ones that typically come with textbook test banks, they're usually not great. They range from mediocre to horrible. There usually are a few good ones. There's a few that I will occasionally use, but they're not the greatest ones out there quite often. Okay, so that's roughly the first half of the test. And the goal here is we're going for knowledge / understanding, and definitely machine assisted with the audience response system or Scantron, something like that, because once again, I'm going to need some help grading these. I don't have a TA. I have to grade it myself. Okay, so the second part of the test is going to be much more either application, maybe a little bit of analysis. So we're looking at understanding, application, maybe some analysis as things go on. These are parts that I will probably have to hand grade. If it's a numerical calculation, the audience response system that I'm using can do that for me, so that might be a good option for me. I'll do a fair amount of those, but a lot of these other ones I'm just going to have to hand grade. And so I want to pay attention to how much I'm trying to hand grade so I don't overwhelm myself. But once again, if I can do a test, as I mentioned in the previous video, if I can grade the test as a whole in, say, 3 minutes, if I have 100 of them, that's 5 hours. For something that's once every month or so, once every 4 weeks, then that's not a big deal. Annoying, but not a big deal. By the way, pro tip, when you are grading exams, if there are more than just simply a multiple choice or something where it's like you match the number kind of thing, and you can write down the list of numbers or letters that have to go in the holes, or if you're giving any partial credit, etc. So if you can just copy them down, that's one thing. But if it's a subjective answer, a partial credit, something we're going to have to think about the answers, grade them one question at a time. So grade every single exam's question number 7, then every single exam's question number 8, and so on and so forth. That way you're fresh in your mind, you're only thinking about one question, you're doing it over and over again, and it's much more consistent and frankly much faster. But that was an aside. Okay, so with these guys, once again, a lot of hand-graded ones, a little bit more mathematical. I'll throw in some partial credit. If I'm hand-grading it, I can throw in partial credit here. And this gets to kind of the mid-level Bloom's taxonomy. So that's the test. Those are usually weighted fairly heavily. I might do quizzes kind of in the same vein, usually maybe the same breakup, maybe a little bit different one. Quizzes should be graded much quicker because they're much smaller than the tests are, and then, you know, it's not quite so overwhelming for me by breaking it up through time. I also tend to write my tests, so they're about an hour, hour and a half in length. My class periods are always longer than that, either 2 or 3 hours. But once you're above about an hour, all of a sudden you're no longer really testing knowledge, you're also testing stamina. So you don't want your test to be too horridly long, and it takes practice to learn how long a test really is. I've definitely written a few that I thought, oh, this is an hour and a half test, everyone's done in 30 minutes, or this is an hour and a half test, it's been 3 hours and they're still here. So it does take some practice getting used to what your students will be able to do in what period of time. There's some rules of thumb, nothing great to be honest, so just takes practice. Okay, the final bin is going to be for those activities that are going to target the top of Bloom's taxonomy. Synthesis, evaluation, and some analysis. These are typically going to have to be longer form, things like essays or presentations. Lab reports are, of course, a classic one. If you can set up a good laboratory activity where they're going to have to evaluate the results, what happened, why might it be a little bit off, this makes for a nice report. Of course, what you're trying to do and your setup, if you're not teaching labs, you know, that's not going to be an option. But the longer form, a couple of these essay formats makes for a nice evaluation of the higher tiers. And for these, you want to get a rubric in. This is for your own sanity. The students are going to love having a rubric, but you need a good, really flushed out rubric for doing these. I would almost be tempted, not almost, I would definitely recommend the first time you do these, don't hand out the rubric, hand out maybe a grading guide, you know, just kind of point evaluations to the students, because what you're going to want to do is once you get the first couple of them, your rubric's going to evolve. This is the thing that drives me nuts about my learning management system. It won't let me edit the rubric. I have to create a whole new one, replace it, regrade everyone's. But what you'll find is that ways things go wrong are not necessarily things that you can predict. You're not going to quite know how things are going until after you have done at least some of the grading. So you look at some of the grading, get a feel for how it's going, and then let your rubric evolve. Now, every time you change your rubric, at least more than a typo, you have to go back and regrade all of the other papers, looking for that part where you changed, just to be consistent. But odds are you are going to have an evolving rubric, at least to start with. As time progresses, you should be able to kind of lock down your rubric, get one that works for that assignment for that class. I hope this was of some help for you, and I will see you in future videos. Have a wonderful day.